All right, so now we're going to talk about simplifying radicals and the quadratic formula. So up to this point, when we've used the quadratic formula, we've ended up with whole numbers. We are now moving into irrational solutions, so we're not going to have whole numbers. So that's why we need to know how to simplify a radical. So as a quick review, when we simplify a radical, what we want you to do is break the number down into its prime factorization. We do that by using a factor tree. So 63 can be broken down to 7 times 9. 7 is a prime number, so that branch stops. 9 is not. 9 can be broken down to 3 times 3. Now 3 and 3 are both prime numbers, so we're done. This is the prime factorization. You're going to circle any pairs you have, underline anything that doesn't have a pair. One of the circled values goes out front. Whatever's underlined goes underneath. So the square root of 63 is equivalent to 3 times the square root of 7. We're going to use that property, okay, down here. So this might look familiar to you because as we're going through the quadratic formula, you end up with a step that looks like this. So we're going to show you what happens when you don't get a perfect square as the discriminant. So when I take the square root of 12, for example, in this number 5, I'm not going to get a whole number. All right. So when you get to this point, when you're using the quadratic formula, what we've done before is you'd type this into your calculator, square root of 12. What you're going to get is a decimal. So when you do that, you need to break down the square root of 12 into its simplified form, just like we practiced before. 12 is equivalent to 2 times 6. 2 is a prime number. That branch is done. 6 can be broken down into 2 times 3. So the prime factorization of 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. There are 2 2's, so I circle them. 1 3, so I underline, which means the square root of 12 in simplified form is 2 radical 3. Whatever's circled, one of them goes out in front. Whatever's underlined goes under the bar. So I can rewrite this now as -8 plus or minus. Instead of square root of 12, I'm going to write it as 2 radical 3 all over 2. All right. So now we need to simplify. Okay. And what we want to look for, all right, first of all, there is nothing you can do on the top in terms of the -8 and the 2 radical 3. 2 radical 3 is saying 2 times the square root of 3. This operation here is plus or minus. So you cannot combine the -8 and the 2 because our order of operations, I'm talking about PEMDAS here, right, tells you to multiply before you add or subtract. You cannot combine these two things together because the 2 is being multiplied to the radical 3. Okay, what we can do is see if I can divide -8 by 2 and 2 radical 3 by 2, which we can. -8 divided by 2, I'm just going to do this. -8 divided by 2 is -4. 2 radical 3 divided by 2 is just going to be radical 3. So our solution here would be -4 plus or minus radical 3. You can leave it as the plus or minus with this part when you don't get a whole number. Okay, so if you are confused how I got to there, we can break this down. I can split this fraction up like this. These two things are the same. Okay, -8 over 2 plus or minus 2 radical 3 over 2 is the same as this fraction here, right? Then I can look at it as -8 divided by 2 is -4. 2 times the square root of 3 over 2. These are going to cancel, leaving me with the square root of 3 plus or minus in between. That's how we can break that down. All right, so let's try that again with number 6. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 26 all over 18. First thing you would try and do is type the square root of 26 into your calculator. It's going to give you a decimal. That should be your hint that you need to simplify. If you plug that into your calculator and get a decimal, you need to simplify. So I'm going to break this up into 2 times 13. Okay? But 2 and 13 are both prime numbers. They both get underlined. They don't have a pair. So this is just the square root of 26. This one cannot be simplified. Okay? But we can see if we can simplify another part of it. So I'm going to split this up into the 2 fractions. 3 over 18 plus or minus the square root of 26 over 18. 3 is a factor of 18, so we can simplify this. Okay, if you divide both of those by 3, you get 1 over 6. Okay, now, even though you might want to look at 26 and 18 and say they're both even, so you can divide away a 2. Square root of 26 is not the same thing as 26. Okay, the square root of 26 is not the same thing as 26. You cannot simplify from within a radical. So this just has to stay as the square root of 26 over 18. And this would be your final answer. There is nothing else you can do with that one. You cannot simplify under a radical. Okay? All right, next one over here. We've got 35 plus or minus the square root of 50 over 5. Step 1. Gus is barking. Gus, stop. Step 1, plug that in your calculator. Square root of 50 is not going to give you a whole number, so you need to simplify. 50 is divisible by 5 and 10. 5 times 10 is 50. 5 is prime. 5 times 2 is 10. I have 2 5s, so I circle them. I have 1 2, so I underline it. 5 radical 2 is the simplified form of the square root of 50. So I'm going to rewrite this now. 35 plus or minus 5 square root of 2 all over 5. Then I'm going to split this fraction up. 35 over 5 plus or minus 5 radical 2 over 5. Okay, 35 divided by 5 is 7. 5 radical 2 over 5, these are going to cancel, leaving us with just radical 2. That would be our solution. Okay, remember, common issues I see, people try and combine the 35 and the 5 first. You cannot do that because of the order of operations. You are multiplying the 5 and the radical 2. So you cannot do anything else. All right? So this is how we're going to work with simplifying our fractions in the quadratic formula. So let's go down here. We're actually going to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to do problem number 11 here. Yeah, we'll do problem 11. So we're going to use the quadratic formula. First thing we need to do, identify A, B, and C. So for this one, A is 1, B is -7, and C is 5. Then I'm going to plug it into my quadratic formula. Remember, it's x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I write this out every single time and just fill in my a, b, and c. So a was here, b is here, and c goes here. All right, so then I am going to write this out simplified. So x is equal to -7 is +7 plus or minus. Remember that we want you to do the discriminant first. So no square root, just type in negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, which is going to be 49 minus 20, which is 29, all over 2. Okay, the next thing you should do is you should try to plug this into your calculator. Everything we've done up to this point, they've ended up being whole numbers, but you will see now that the square root of 29 is not a whole number. That means you would try to simplify it. So I'm going to come over here and take the square root of 29, see if I can simplify. Unfortunately, though, 29 is a prime number, so we can't break it down anymore, which means for us that we are almost done. So I'm going to split this up as x equals 7 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. And 7 is also not an even number, so there's nothing we can do there, which means that is our final answer. You could also leave it in the form directly above, plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. You can leave them separate or together. This one works together because 2 is the denominator for both of them. All right. Let's try another one. I'm going to skip over here to 13, where we have A is 4, B is 8, C is negative 1. And I'm going to plug this into my quadratic formula. Again, x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Plugging in my values. So we've got the opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4a. Oop, it's not a 1 this time, it's a 4. A, C, all over 2a. Then we simplify. We get negative 8 plus or minus. Only plug this part into your calculator. That's going to be 64 plus 16. So the square root of 80. Right? 64 plus 16, 70, 80. Yep. All over 8. Okay. The next step would be to plug this into your calculator. Square root of 80. It is not going to be a whole number. When it's not a whole number, you need to simplify the radical. 80 is not a prime number, so we can simplify. I'm going to simplify this to 8 times 10. 8 can be factored to 2 times 4. 2 and 2. 10 can be factored to 2 and 5. So our prime factorization here is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. I've got 2 2's here, 2 2's here, and a 5 by itself, which means one of each group goes out in front. Whatever's underlined goes underneath. The square root of 80 is equivalent to 4 radical 5. So I'm going to come back over here. I never put an equal sign. X is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 4 radical 5 all over 8. Okay, now we want to split this up into our two fractions to see what we can simplify. So x is equal to negative 8 over 8 plus or minus 4 radical 5 over 8. Negative 8 divided by 8, this right here is what I'm talking about, is negative 1. All right. And then 4 radical 5 over 8. 4 divided by 8 is 1/2. So it's going to be radical 5 over 2. These are our solutions. All right, so make sure you're practicing not only using our quadratic formula, But then simplifying our radicals, if you need any help, make sure you are sending us messages and asking questions. This is something you just got to practice over and over again.